Humble cleaning lady rushed the millionaire's 8-year-old son to the hospital, and his gesture changed everything. Subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The bitter December wind cut through downtown Aspen Heights like a blade, rattling the windows of the towering glass office building that housed Blackstone Enterprises. Snow had begun to fall in thick, lazy flakes, coating the pristine streets of Colorado's most exclusive mountain town in a blanket of white that would soon be disturbed only by the tracks of luxury SUVs and imported sports cars. Maria Gonzalez pulled her worn winter coat tighter as she stepped through the employee entrance at 5:30 a.m., her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. At 45, she had the kind of weathered hands that spoke of decades spent scrubbing, polishing, and cleaning up after other people's lives. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was pulled back in a practical ponytail that had become her trademark over the 8 years she'd been maintaining the executive floors of Blackstone Enterprises. "Morning, Jimmy," she called softly to the security guard, a kind-faced man in his 60s who always had a warm smile and a fresh cup of coffee waiting for her. "Morning, Maria. Cold one today." Mrs. Blackstone's already upstairs, came in around 5 with that new assistant of hers. Seemed pretty wound up about something. Maria nodded, not surprised. Victoria Blackstone was always wound up about something. Charity galas, social rankings, or whatever drama was unfolding in the rarefied circles of Aspen Heights elite. Maria had learned to navigate around the woman's moods like a ship avoiding treacherous waters. The elevator hummed quietly as it carried her to the 30th floor, where the Blackstone family's private offices occupied an entire level. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the Rocky Mountains, their peaks dusted with snow that caught the early morning light like scattered diamonds. Inside, the space was a testament to understated wealth: Italian marble floors, Brazilian rosewood furniture, and original paintings that Maria suspected cost more than most people's homes. She began her routine in CEO Richard Blackstone's office, a massive space dominated by a mahogany desk the size of a small car. Family photos sat in sterling silver frames, formal portraits that looked more like campaign advertisements than intimate family moments. There was Richard himself, a tall man with steel-gray hair and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to evaluate everything in terms of profit margins. Victoria, blonde and surgically perfected, posed with the practiced smile of someone who'd spent years in front of cameras. And then there was 8-year-old Samuel, Sammy to those few who knew him well. A pale, thin boy with his father's intense eyes, but none of his commanding presence. Maria had been cleaning this office for 8 years, but she'd only really started noticing the family dynamics in the past 2. There was something hollow about the photos, something that spoke of distance rather than warmth. She'd seen enough families in her line of work to recognize the signs. Parents too busy building empires to notice their foundations cracking at home. She moved methodically through the space, dusting surfaces that gleamed even before she touched them, organizing papers that Richard's assistant would later reorganize according to some incomprehensible system. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the marble floors as she worked. It was nearly 7 a.m. when she heard the sound, a strange, rhythmic thumping coming from somewhere deeper in the office suite. Maria paused, cloth in hand, listening intently. There it was again, accompanied now by what sounded like labored breathing. "Hello," she called out, her voice echoing in the empty corridors. "Mr. Blackstone? Mrs. Blackstone?" No response came, but the sounds continued, more urgent now. Maria dropped her cleaning supplies and followed the noise toward the family's private library, a room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books that probably hadn't been opened in decades. The Persian rug that dominated the center of the room was worth more than Maria's annual salary, and sprawled across its intricate patterns was young Samuel Blackstone, his small body convulsing in violent seizure. "Jesus Christo," Maria whispered, then louder, "Sammy. Sammy, can you hear me?" She'd seen this before. Her younger brother had suffered from epilepsy as a child, and she recognized the signs immediately. The boy's eyes had rolled back, showing only the whites, and foam was beginning to form at the corners of his mouth. His entire body was rigid, muscles contracting in waves that made him look like a marionette controlled by a cruel puppeteer. Without hesitation, Maria dropped to her knees beside him, her training from those long-ago days with her brother kicking in. She quickly moved the coffee table away from his thrashing limbs and placed her folded coat under his head to protect it from the hard floor. "It's okay, mijo," she whispered, using the Spanish endearment that came naturally to her in moments of crisis. "You're going to be okay. I'm here." She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers, dialing 911 while keeping her eyes fixed on Samuel's face. The seizure seemed to be lasting longer than normal. She'd counted nearly 3 minutes already, and she knew that was approaching dangerous territory. 911, what's your emergency? This is Maria Gonzalez at Blackstone Enterprises, 30th floor. I have an 8-year-old boy having a seizure. It's been going on for over 3 minutes now. Is the child conscious? No, he's turning blue around the mouth. Please hurry. Ma'am, paramedics are on their way. Is this the child's first seizure? I don't know. I work here. I'm the cleaning lady. His parents aren't here. As she spoke, Maria watched Samuel's convulsions begin to slow, his body gradually relaxing as the seizure ran its course. But he remained unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. She checked his pulse, rapid but steady, and made sure his airway was clear. "The seizure has stopped," she reported to the dispatcher. "But he's still unconscious. That's normal after a seizure. Keep him comfortable and don't try to move him. The paramedics should be there in just a few minutes." Maria stayed on the line, one hand resting gently on Samuel's shoulder, offering what comfort she could to the unconscious boy. In the growing morning light, he looked even smaller and more fragile than usual, his expensive clothes rumpled and his carefully styled hair mussed. She found herself thinking about her own son, Carlos, now 16 and healthy, thank God. The fierce protectiveness she felt for him now extended to this wealthy child who seemed, in this moment, utterly alone. The paramedics arrived with impressive efficiency, their heavy boots echoing through the marble corridors as Maria guided them to the library. 2 professionals in navy blue uniforms immediately took charge, asking rapid-fire questions as they examined Samuel. "Any known medical conditions?" asked the lead paramedic, a woman with graying hair and competent hands. "I don't know," Maria admitted. "I just work here. I found him like this." "Parents or guardians present?" "No. They come in early sometimes, but I haven't seen them today." The paramedics exchanged glances. "We need to transport him for evaluation. Can you contact his parents?" Maria nodded, though the thought of calling Richard or Victoria Blackstone filled her with dread. They were not people who appreciated disruptions to their carefully orchestrated lives, and she could already imagine their reaction to being told their son had suffered a medical emergency under her watch. As the paramedics prepared Samuel for transport, securing him to a stretcher with practiced efficiency, Maria made a decision that would change everything. She couldn't let this child go to the hospital alone, unconscious and frightened when he woke up. Her shift could wait. The marble floors could remain unpolished for one morning. "I'm coming with him," she announced, gathering her purse and winter coat. The lead paramedic looked surprised. "Are you family?" Maria looked down at Samuel's pale face, at the way his small hand curled unconsciously around the edge of the blanket they'd covered him with. In that moment, family felt like more than just blood and shared surnames. "Someone needs to be with him," she said simply. The ambulance ride to Aspen Heights General Hospital felt endless, though the paramedic assured Maria it would only take 12 minutes. She sat in the cramped space, watching the medical team monitor Samuel's vital signs while the vehicle's sirens wailed through the wealthy neighborhoods. Through the small window, she caught glimpses of the town she'd called home for 23 years. $1 million ski chalets with perfectly manicured lawns, boutique shops that sold single sweaters for more than she made in a month, and the ever-present backdrop of the Rocky Mountains standing like silent sentinels over it all. Samuel remained unconscious, his breathing steady but shallow. The paramedic, whose name tag read Jennifer Martinez, kept checking his pupils with a small flashlight, her expression professionally neutral but concerned. "Has he been sick lately?" Jennifer asked. "Any fever, headaches, unusual behavior?" Maria searched her memory. She'd seen Samuel around the office building occasionally over the years, usually trailing behind his mother during school holidays or summer breaks. He was always quiet, always well-behaved, the kind of child who seemed to fade into the background of adult conversations. I don't really know, she admitted, feeling helpless. I see him sometimes when I'm working, but we don't really talk. He seems tired a lot. Pale. Jennifer nodded, making notes on her tablet. Post-ictal state is normal after a seizure. His body needs time to recover. But the duration concerns me. 4 minutes is significant for a first-time seizure. What if it's not his first? The paramedic's expression grew more serious. Then we need his medical history, and we need it fast. As they pulled into the hospital's emergency bay, Maria realized she'd been clutching her phone so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She still hadn't called the Blackstones. Part of her hoped they would simply appear, summoned by some parental instinct that transcended their busy schedules. But she knew better than to count on miracles. The emergency department of Aspen Heights General was a study in controlled chaos. Despite the early hour, medical staff moved with purposeful urgency between curtained treatment areas. The smell of antiseptic mixed with coffee created an oddly comforting atmosphere that reminded Maria of her own childhood, spent in similar waiting rooms with her epileptic brother. Room 7, called out a nurse, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and graying temples. Dr. Patterson is on his way. As they transferred Samuel to the hospital bed, Maria felt suddenly out of place. Her worn jeans and faded cleaning company shirt stood in stark contrast to the pristine medical environment. She realized she had no official reason to be here, no legal right to make decisions for this child. Yet as Samuel's eyes began to flutter open, she couldn't bring herself to leave. Where am I? Samuel's voice was barely a whisper, thick with confusion. Maria moved closer to the bed. You're at the hospital, Mijo. You had a seizure at your father's office. Do you remember what happened? Samuel's blue eyes, so much like his father's, but somehow warmer, tried to focus on her face. You're Maria, he said with surprising clarity. You cleaned Dad's office. That's right. How are you feeling? Tired. And my head hurts. He tried to sit up, then winced and fell back against the pillow. Where are my parents? The question hit Maria like a physical blow. Where indeed were Richard and Victoria Blackstone? Their son had just suffered a major medical emergency, and they were nowhere to be found. She glanced at her phone, 7:45 a.m. Surely they would have noticed Samuel's absence by now. I'm going to call them, she assured him, though the prospect filled her with anxiety. Dr. Patterson arrived before she could dial, a tall man with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone who'd spent decades dealing with medical crises. He introduced himself to Samuel with the practiced gentleness pediatric specialists develop over years of frightened children. So, young man, I hear you gave everyone quite a scare this morning. Can you tell me what you remember? Samuel's brow furrowed with concentration. I was in the library. I wanted to read before Mom got there. She doesn't like it when I'm underfoot during her meetings. I felt strange, dizzy, and then he looked confused. I don't remember anything else until I woke up here. Dr. Patterson nodded, making notes. Any headaches lately? Nausea? Problems with your vision? Sometimes my head hurts, especially when I'm really tired. And sometimes I see spots, like little lights dancing around. Maria felt her stomach drop. These sounded like warning signs that had been ignored. She watched Dr. Patterson's expression grow more serious as he conducted his examination, checking Samuel's reflexes, looking into his eyes, asking detailed questions about his medical history that the boy couldn't fully answer. I need to speak with his parents, Dr. Patterson told Maria quietly. This wasn't a simple febrile seizure. There are indicators that suggest he may have been experiencing petit mal seizures for some time. What does that mean? Small seizures that might look like daydreaming or spacing out. If they've been happening regularly and going unnoticed. He didn't finish the sentence, but his implication was clear. With trembling fingers, Maria dialed Richard Blackstone's private number, the one reserved for true emergencies. It rang 4 times before his crisp, businesslike voice answered. This better be important. I'm in a meeting with investors from Tokyo. Mr. Blackstone, this is Maria Gonzalez. I work. I know who you are. What do you want? Maria took a deep breath. Sir, I'm at Aspen Heights General Hospital. Samuel had a seizure this morning. A bad one. He's conscious now, but the doctor needs to speak with you and Mrs. Blackstone immediately. The silence stretched so long Maria wondered if the call had dropped. When Richard finally spoke, his voice was tight with barely controlled anger. How did this happen? Where were you when it started? I found him in the library around 7 a.m. He was already seizing when I got there. Mr. Blackstone, he needs you here. The doctor has questions about his medical history. My son doesn't have a medical history. He's perfectly healthy. Maria looked across the room at Samuel, who was now hooked up to four and various monitors, his pale face making him look even younger than his 8 years. Sir, with respect, Dr. Patterson thinks Samuel may have been having small seizures for a while. Things that might have looked like he was just spacing out or daydreaming. Another long pause. We'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't let them do anything until we arrive. The line went dead, leaving Maria staring at her phone. She turned back to Samuel, who had been listening with the kind of intense attention that children develop when adults think they're not paying attention. Are they angry? He asked quietly. Maria sat in the chair beside his bed, her heart breaking at the resignation in his voice. They're worried about you, Mijo. Sometimes when adults are scared, they sound angry instead. Samuel nodded with the wisdom of a child who had learned to interpret his parents' emotions through their tones rather than their words. Maria, thank you for staying with me. I don't like being alone in hospitals. You've been in hospitals before? Once. Last year. I fell off my bike and needed stitches. Mom dropped me off and went to her book club meeting. She said the nurses would take good care of me. The casual way Samuel relayed this information made Maria's chest tighten with a mixture of anger and sorrow. What kind of mother left her injured child alone in a hospital? But she kept her expression neutral, not wanting to burden Samuel with her own feelings about his parents' choices. Well, you're not alone today, she assured him. I'm staying right here until your parents arrive. As they waited, Maria found herself studying Samuel's face, noting details she'd never had the opportunity to observe before. He had his father's sharp intelligence, but none of Richard's hardness. There was a gentleness to him, a sensitivity that seemed at odds with the Blackstone family's reputation for ruthless business practices. The next 20 minutes would bring revelations that would shake the foundations of everything Maria thought she knew about the family she'd served for 8 years, setting in motion a series of events that would ultimately transform them all. The sound of expensive heels clicking against hospital linoleum announced Victoria Blackstone's arrival before she swept through the emergency department doors like a force of nature. Even at 8 in the morning, after what must have been a frantic rush to the hospital, she looked immaculate. Her platinum blonde hair styled in a perfect bob, her makeup flawless, her designer coat draped over a silk blouse that probably cost more than Maria's monthly rent. Richard followed close behind, his charcoal gray suit wrinkled from sleep, but his bearings still commanding. Phone pressed to his ear as he concluded what sounded like damage control with his Tokyo investors. Where is he? Victoria demanded of the first nurse she encountered, her voice carrying the imperious tone of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. Maria stood as they approached Samuel's curtained area, her stomach knotting with anxiety. She'd worked for wealthy families before, but the Blackstones operated on a different level entirely. Their displeasure could cost her not just this job, but her reputation in a town where the wealthy families all talked to each other. Mrs. Blackstone, she began carefully, Samuel is stable now. The doctor. Don't. Victoria's ice-blue eyes fixed on Maria with undisguised hostility. Don't speak to me about my son's condition. You're the cleaning lady. Where were you when this happened? How could you let him have access to areas where he could get hurt? Victoria, Richard said sharply, finally ending his phone call. Not here. Not now. But Victoria was just getting started, her voice rising despite her husband's warning. No, Richard. I want to know how our 8-year-old son ended up alone in your office building early enough to have a medical emergency that required this woman, to make medical decisions for him. Samuel's weak voice cut through his mother's tirade. Mom? I'm okay. Maria helped me. Victoria's expression softened instantly as she turned toward her son, though Maria noticed the change seemed more performative than genuine. Darling, you gave us such a fright. What were you doing in Daddy's building so early? I wanted to read before your meeting. The library is quiet in the morning. Samuel's explanation was matter of fact, but Maria caught the underlying message. He'd been seeking refuge from his mother's busy social schedule. Dr. Patterson chose that moment to enter, his presence commanding immediate attention. Mr. and Mrs. Blackstone, I presume? I'm Dr. Patterson, Chief of Pediatric Neurology. We need to talk about Samuel's condition. His condition? Richard's voice sharpened. There's no condition. He's a healthy 8-year-old boy who had some kind of episode. Probably low blood sugar or exhaustion. Dr. Patterson consulted his tablet, his expression diplomatically neutral. Mr. Blackstone, Samuel experienced a tonic-clonic seizure lasting approximately 4 minutes. That's not something we dismiss as exhaustion. More concerning are the symptoms he's described: recurring headaches, visual disturbances, periods of what you might have interpreted as daydreaming. Are you suggesting we've been negligent? Victoria's tone could have frozen the Colorado River. I'm suggesting that Samuel may have been experiencing absence seizures, brief episodes that can easily be mistaken for normal childhood inattention. They often precede more serious seizure activity. Maria watched the color drain from Victoria's face, though whether from genuine concern or social embarrassment was unclear. Richard, meanwhile, had adopted his boardroom posture, arms crossed, jaw set, ready for a negotiation. "What kind of testing are we talking about?" he asked. "EEG, MRI, comprehensive blood work. We need to rule out any structural abnormalities in the brain and determine if this is idiopathic epilepsy or symptomatic of another condition." The medical terminology seemed to hit Victoria like a physical blow. "Epilepsy? You're talking about epilepsy? That's not possible. The Ashworth family has no history of neurological disorders." Maria noticed that Victoria referenced her own family lineage, not Richard's. She also noticed the way Samuel's hand unconsciously reached for hers when his mother mentioned epilepsy, as if the clinical term frightened him more than the actual seizure had. "Mrs. Blackstone," Dr. Patterson continued gently, "epilepsy isn't always hereditary, and it's far more manageable than most people realize. But we need accurate information about Samuel's recent behavior to make a proper diagnosis." "His behavior has been perfectly normal," Victoria insisted, but there was a note of uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Mom," Samuel spoke up quietly, "remember when you got mad because I wasn't listening during your charity committee meeting? And at dinner last week when Dad asked me 3 times about school?" The silence that followed was deafening. Maria watched realization dawn on both parents' faces. Memories of moments they'd attributed to childish inattention suddenly taking on new, more frightening significance. Richard ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture Maria had never seen him make in all her years of observing him from the periphery of his perfectly controlled world. How long? If this has been happening, how long might it have been going on? Without proper medical history, it's impossible to say. Months, possibly longer. The good news is that childhood epilepsy is highly treatable. With proper medication and monitoring, most children lead completely normal lives. Medication? Victoria's voice cracked slightly. Long-term medication? Most likely yes. But Mrs. Blackstone, this is manageable. Samuel can continue with all his normal activities, school, sports, social functions, with proper precautions. Maria found herself thinking about her brother Miguel, who had struggled with epilepsy throughout his childhood in their working-class neighborhood. Their family hadn't had access to cutting-edge neurologists or private hospitals, but Miguel had still grown up to become a successful teacher, married with children of his own. The Blackstones' resources meant Samuel's prognosis would be even better. "When can we take him home?" Richard asked, ever practical. "We'll want to keep him for observation through today, run the initial tests. If everything looks stable, he can go home tomorrow morning." As Dr. Patterson left to arrange the testing, an uncomfortable silence settled over the small space. Victoria sat rigidly in the chair beside Samuel's bed, her composure cracking around the edges. Richard paced the small area like a caged predator, clearly struggling with a situation that couldn't be solved with money or influence. "Mr. and Mrs. Blackstone," Maria said carefully, "I should probably get back to work. I just wanted to make sure Samuel was okay." "No." The word came from Samuel, surprisingly firm despite his exhaustion. "I want Maria to stay." "Sweetheart," Victoria began, "Maria has her own responsibilities. She can't just—" "Please," Samuel interrupted, his blue eyes moving between his parents with unusual directness. "She's the one who helped me. She knew what to do." Richard studied Maria for a long moment, his business instincts apparently working even in this medical crisis. "You've seen seizures before. My brother had epilepsy as a child. I recognized the signs. And you knew to call 911 immediately, not to move him, how to keep him safe until the paramedics arrived. Maria nodded, unsure where this was leading. We were in meetings, emergency sessions with our legal team about the Henderson acquisition. If you hadn't been there. Richard's voice trailed off as the full implications hit him. Richard, Victoria said sharply, we don't need to discuss business matters in front of the woman who may have saved our son's life. Richard's tone was cutting. The woman who rode in an ambulance with him while we were worried about stock prices? The tension between the Blackstones was palpable now, years of carefully maintained facades beginning to crack under the pressure of genuine crisis. Maria realized she was witnessing something few people ever saw. The private dynamics of Aspen Heights' most powerful family, stripped of their public masks by fear and exhaustion. I should go, Maria said again, gathering her purse. Actually, Richard said slowly, I'd like you to stay, at least until the test results come back. Samuel clearly trusts you, and frankly, your experience with his condition might be valuable. Victoria's expression suggested she had strong opinions about this arrangement, but she remained silent, perhaps recognizing that her husband was right. For the first time in 8 years of working for the Blackstones, Maria found herself not just in their presence, but genuinely needed by them. It was a shift that would prove more significant than any of them could imagine. The neurological testing took most of the afternoon, with Samuel being wheeled between different departments for various scans and procedures. Maria found herself in the unusual position of being part of the Blackstone inner circle, privy to medical consultations and family discussions that normally would have been far above her station. Victoria's initial hostility had evolved into a cold tolerance, while Richard seemed genuinely grateful for her presence, particularly when Samuel grew anxious before the MRI. The machine is very loud, Mijo, Maria explained to Samuel as they waited in the pre-procedure area. It sounds scary, but it can't hurt you. I'll be right outside the whole time. Will you sing? Samuel asked quietly. My abuela used to sing to me when I was scared. The request caught Maria off guard. In all her years of cleaning the Blackstone offices, she'd never heard Samuel mention a grandmother. She glanced at Victoria, whose face had gone pale at the mention of an abuela. Samuel doesn't have a grandmother, Victoria said sharply. Both our mothers are deceased. Not Mom's mom, Samuel clarified with the matter-of-fact honesty of childhood. My other abuela, the one who used to clean the house when I was little. She had gray hair and sang songs in Spanish. The silence that followed was deafening. Maria watched Victoria's face cycle through several emotions, surprise, anger, and something that looked almost like fear. Richard, meanwhile, had gone very still, his businessman's mask firmly in place. Samuel, Victoria said carefully, you must be confused. We've never employed any Spanish-speaking housekeepers. Yes, we did, Samuel insisted. She made the best cookies, and she always smelled like lavender soap. She called me Pequeño Príncipe. She said it meant little prince. Maria felt her breath catch. Pequeño Príncipe. She hadn't heard that phrase in over a decade, not since her own mother had stopped using it for Carlos when he'd outgrown such endearments. But more shocking was the realization that Samuel was describing someone who sounded remarkably like her own mother, Elena, who had worked as a housekeeper for several wealthy families in Aspen Heights before her arthritis had forced her to retire. Mrs. Blackstone, Maria said carefully. What was the woman's name? The one Samuel remembers. There was no woman, Victoria snapped, but her eyes avoided Maria's gaze. Samuel has a very active imagination. Elena, Samuel said suddenly, his face brightening. Her name was Elena, and she had the softest hands. She used to let me help her fold towels. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Maria gripped the arm of her chair, her mind racing. Elena Gonzalez, her mother, had worked for the Blackstones? When? Why had she never mentioned it? Maria's mother was many things, but secretive about her work wasn't usually one of them. When was this, Samuel? Maria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. When I was really little. Maybe 4 or 5. She stopped coming after. His brow furrowed with concentration. After I got sick that one time. Mom said we didn't need help anymore. Victoria stood abruptly. I need some air. Richard, can you handle the medical consultation? She left without waiting for an answer, her heels clicking rapidly down the hospital corridor. Richard watched her go with an expression Maria couldn't quite read. Part frustration, part something that looked almost like guilt. Mr. Blackstone, Maria began hesitantly. My mother is Elena Gonzalez. She worked as a housekeeper for several families in Aspen Heights until about 3 years ago. Richard's poker face slipped for just a moment, revealing what looked like genuine shock. Your mother? Yes, sir. She never mentioned working for your family, but if Samuel remembers her. Maria's mind was spinning with questions. Why would her mother keep such a job secret? What had happened to cause her employment to end so abruptly? Before Richard could respond, a technician arrived to take Samuel for his MRI. As they wheeled him away, the boy called out, Maria, will you ask your mom if she still makes those sugar cookies? The ones shaped like stars. The specificity of the memory hit Maria like a physical blow. Her mother's star-shaped sugar cookies were a family tradition, made only during Christmas, and Samuel's described them perfectly, down to the way Elena dusted them with cinnamon and sugar. Alone with Richard in the waiting area, Maria felt the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. The powerful businessman who had always seemed larger than life suddenly looked tired, even vulnerable. Richard, she said, using his first name for the first time in 8 years. What happened with my mother? He was quiet for so long Maria thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. Your mother was. She was very good with Samuel. Probably too good. What does that mean? Victoria felt that Samuel was becoming too attached, that he preferred your mother's company to his own family's. Richard rubbed his temples, a gesture of exhaustion that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than just today's crisis. There was an incident. Samuel had what we now realize was probably a seizure, though at the time we thought he'd just fainted. Your mother wanted us to take him to a doctor immediately. Victoria thought she was overreacting. Maria felt pieces clicking into place. Mom insisted, didn't she? She probably said something about epilepsy, about getting him properly tested. She did. Victoria didn't appreciate being told how to care for her own child by domestic help, especially when your mother was right about Samuel needing medical attention. So you fired her. Victoria made the decision. I was traveling, dealing with the Singapore expansion. By the time I returned, your mother was gone and Victoria had hired a service instead of individual housekeepers. The casual way he described appending her mother's livelihood, reducing it to a business decision made while he was focused on more important matters, sparked an anger in Maria that surprised her with its intensity. But underneath the anger was a deeper hurt. Her mother had been protecting Samuel, advocating for his health, and had been punished for it. Mr. Blackstone, my mother never told me about working for your family. Not once in 3 years. Perhaps she thought it would affect your job here. Or perhaps she was hurt. Really hurt. Maria's voice was steady, but there was steel in it now. She spent her whole life taking care of other people's children, loving them like her own. Being dismissed for caring too much about a sick child. That would have broken her heart. Richard had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm sorry. I should have. Things were handled badly. Before Maria could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Carlos. Mom, where are you? Grandma Elena fell this morning. She's asking for you. The day's emotional weight suddenly felt overwhelming. Her mother, the same woman who had cared for Samuel, who had recognized his illness before his own parents, was hurt and asking for her. Meanwhile, Samuel was undergoing medical tests that should have been done years ago if the adults in his life had listened to Elena's concerns. I have to go, Maria said, standing. My mother needs me. Maria, wait. Richard's voice stopped her at the doorway. The test results should be available in a few hours. Samuel, he's asked for you specifically. Would you consider coming back this evening? She looked back at him. This powerful man who could buy and sell most of Aspen Heights, now asking a favor from the daughter of the woman his wife had fired for caring too much about his son. I'll think about it, she said. As Maria hurried toward the hospital exit, her mind raced with implications she was only beginning to understand. Her mother's secret employment with the Blackstones, Samuel's obvious attachment to Elena, Victoria's reaction to the mention of an abuela. It all pointed to a history more complex and painful than she'd ever imagined. What she didn't yet realize was that this was only the beginning. Hidden in her mother's old papers, stored in boxes Elena had thought would never be opened, were documents that would reveal connections between the Gonzalez and Blackstone families that went back much further than anyone suspected. Secrets that would shake the foundations of everything Maria thought she knew about her own identity and her place in the carefully ordered hierarchy of Aspen Heights. The truth, when it finally emerged, would prove that sometimes the most profound family bonds are forged not by blood, but by love, sacrifice, and the courage to speak uncomfortable truths. Maria's 20-year-old Honda Civic struggled up the winding mountain road to Pine Ridge Trailer Park, where her mother had lived since retiring from housekeeping 3 years ago. The contrast between the gleaming hospital she'd just left and the modest mobile home community couldn't have been starker. Here, American flags hung from aluminum awnings, children's bicycles lay scattered in small yards, and the scent of wood smoke from aging chimneys mixed with the crisp mountain air. Elena Gonzalez's double-wide sat at the end of a quiet street, distinguished by the carefully tended flower garden that somehow managed to bloom even in Colorado's harsh climate. Maria found her 68-year-old mother sitting on her small porch, her left wrist wrapped in an elastic bandage, stubbornly refusing to go inside despite the dropping temperature. "Mija," Elena called out in Spanish as Maria approached, "you didn't need to come. It's just a little fall. Just a little fall." Maria replied, also in Spanish, settling beside her mother on the wooden bench that had seen better decades. "Carlos said you were asking for me." Elena's weathered face, still beautiful despite the lines carved by years of hard work, softened with affection. "I worry about you, working so hard for people who don't appreciate what they have. Today, when I fell, I kept thinking about Los Niños Ricos, the rich children I used to care for, wondering if anyone really loves them." The comment struck Maria as oddly specific. "Mama, there's something I need to ask you about. Do you remember a family called Blackstone? You worked for them a few years ago." Elena's expression immediately shuddered, her dark eyes growing distant. "Why do you ask about them?" "Because I work for them now. Have been for 8 years. And today, their little boy, Samuel, he mentioned you. He remembered your cookies, your songs, how you called him Pequeño Príncipe." For a long moment, Elena said nothing, her gaze fixed on the mountains in the distance. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that Maria had never heard before. "Samuel, mi pequeño Samuel. How is he? Is he well? He had a seizure today, Mama. A bad one. I found him at the office and took him to the hospital." Elena's hand flew to her chest, her face draining of color. "Dios mío. I knew it. I told that woman. I told her he needed to see a doctor. The way he would zone out, the little tremors in his hands when he was tired. But she wouldn't listen. Why didn't you ever tell me you worked for them?" Elena stood carefully, favoring her injured wrist, and walked to the porch railing. Some jobs break your heart, Mija. That little boy, he was so hungry for love, for attention. His parents, they were always too busy, too important. I became like his abuela, and he became like my own grandchild." Maria joined her mother at the railing, understanding beginning to dawn. "You loved him. I loved him like I loved you and Carlos. Maybe more, because he needed it so desperately." Elena's voice cracked slightly. "When I saw the signs of epilepsy, I had worked for another family whose child had it. I tried to tell them. The father was traveling, always traveling. The mother, she accused me of trying to scare them, of overstepping my place. So they fired you. Worse, she told me I was becoming inappropriately attached to Samuel, that I was confusing him about family boundaries. She said I was just the help, and I needed to remember my place." Elena's shoulders sagged with the memory. "She had security escort me out while Samuel was at school. I never got to say goodbye." The cruelty of it hit Maria like a physical blow. She imagined her mother, dignified, loving Elena, being escorted out like a criminal for the crime of caring too much about a neglected child. "He asked about your star cookies today," Maria said softly. He remembered them perfectly. Elena wiped at her eyes with the back of her uninjured hand. "I used to make them just for him. His mother didn't allow sugar in the house. Bad for his complexion," she said. "But children need sweetness in their lives, Verdad? Mama, there's something else. When I was cleaning out Dad's old papers last month, I found some documents I didn't understand. Birth certificates, medical records from when you were pregnant with me. There was a name I didn't recognize, a doctor I'd never heard of." Elena went very still. "What name?" "Dr. Harrison Ashworth. The same last name as Mrs. Blackstone's maiden name. I thought it was just a coincidence, but now." "Mija, sit down. Please." Elena's tone made Maria's stomach clench with apprehension. They returned to the bench, and Elena took her daughter's hands in her weathered ones. There are things about your birth, about our family, that I never told you. Things I hoped I would never have to tell you. What kind of things? Elena looked toward the mountains again, as if drawing strength from their permanence. In 1979, I was 19 years old, working as a maid for the Ashworth family. Victoria's parents, old money, very traditional, very proud of their bloodline. Maria felt the world shift slightly. Pieces of a puzzle she hadn't known existed beginning to arrange themselves in her mind. There was a son, Victoria's older brother, Benjamin Ashworth. He was supposed to inherit everything, the fortune, the social position, the family legacy. But Benjamin had problems. He drank too much, spent money recklessly, and he had a weakness for inappropriate relationships. Inappropriate how? With the help. With women his family considered beneath him. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper now. I was young, I was grateful for the work, and he was handsome and charming when he wanted to be. I thought he cared about me. The implications hit Maria like a sledgehammer. Mama, are you saying? I'm saying that when I became pregnant with you, the Ashworth family had a choice to make. They could acknowledge that their heir had fathered a child with a Mexican housemaid, or they could make the problem disappear. They paid you to leave. They did more than that. They relocated me to Aspen Heights, set up a trust fund that provided just enough money to live modestly, but not enough to cause trouble. They arranged for me to meet your stepfather, the man you knew as Papa, and paid him to marry me and give you his name. Maria felt like she was drowning in information that rewritten her entire understanding of her identity. So Richard Blackstone's wife, Victoria, is your half-aunt. And that little boy you helped today, Samuel, he's your half-cousin. The magnitude of the revelation left Maria speechless. For 45 years, she had believed herself to be the daughter of a hard-working immigrant family, proud of their modest success through honest labor. Now she was learning that blue blood, the same bloodline that had produced Aspen Heights' social elite, flowed through her veins. Why are you telling me this now? Because, Elena said firmly, that little boy needs someone who truly loves him. His parents are too caught up in their own importance to see what's right in front of them. And maybe it's time the Ashworth family learned that their blood doesn't make them better than anyone else, just luckier. Does Victoria know? She knew about me and Benjamin, but I don't think she ever knew about you. Her parents made sure of that. Benjamin died in a skiing accident when you were 3, drunk and reckless to the end. Victoria inherited everything. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the trailer park, Maria sat in stunned silence, processing the fact that she was not who she had thought she was for her entire life. The woman she had worked for, cleaned up after, and deferred to for 8 years was actually her half-aunt. The child she had rescued that morning was her own family. But more than that, she realized that Elena's firing 3 years ago hadn't just been about an overprotective housekeeper. It had been about Victoria unconsciously rejecting the same bloodline she was so proud of, simply because it came in a package she deemed unworthy. What do we do now? Maria asked. Elena squeezed her daughter's hand. Now, Mija, you go back to that hospital and take care of our Samuel. And when the time is right, when he needs us most, we'll decide how much truth this family can handle. As Maria drove back down the mountain toward Aspen Heights General Hospital, her mind raced with the implications of her mother's revelations. She was no longer just Maria Gonzalez, cleaning lady. She was Maria Gonzalez Ashworth, rightful member of one of Colorado's most prominent families, driving her beat-up Honda to care for a cousin who had no idea they were related. The irony was almost overwhelming. But underneath the shock and confusion was a growing sense of purpose. Samuel needed her, not just as the woman who had saved his life, but as family. And for the first time in her life, Maria had the power to give him something his parents' money couldn't buy: unconditional love from someone who shared his blood. Maria returned to the hospital as the sun was setting behind the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that reflected off the snow-capped peaks. The weight of her mother's revelations sat heavy on her shoulders as she navigated the familiar corridors of Aspen Heights General, her mind still reeling from the knowledge that everything she believed about her identity had been carefully constructed fiction. She found Samuel's room on the pediatric ward, a cheerful space with cartoon murals and child-sized furniture that seemed almost absurd given the serious nature of his condition. Through the doorway, she could see him sitting up in bed, looking small and pale against the white hospital linens, while Victoria sat rigidly in a nearby chair, scrolling through her phone with the practiced efficiency of someone managing multiple social obligations. "Maria?" Samuel's face lit up when he spotted her in the doorway. "You came back." "Of course I did, Mijo. I promised, didn't I?" Maria entered the room, acutely aware that she was now seeing Victoria through an entirely different lens. This wasn't just her demanding employer. This was her half-aunt, daughter of the family that had paid to keep Maria's existence secret for 45 years. Victoria looked up from her phone, her expression carefully neutral. "The tests are complete. We're waiting for Dr. Patterson to review the results." "How are you feeling, Samuel?" Maria asked, settling into the chair on the opposite side of his bed. "Better, but kind of scared about what the doctor's going to say." Samuel's honesty was refreshing after a day filled with adult evasions and half-truths. "The MRI machine was really loud, but I pretended I was in a spaceship like you said." Maria smiled, though her heart ached as she studied his features with new eyes. Now that she knew to look for it, she could see traces of the Ashworth bloodline, the same strong jawline that marked Elena's old photographs of Benjamin, the same deep-set blue eyes that Victoria had inherited from their mother. "Samuel," Victoria said sharply, "you don't need to bother Maria with your fears. She's not family." The words hit Maria like a slap, but she kept her expression neutral. If only Victoria knew how wrong she was. "She feels like family," Samuel said quietly, then looked directly at his mother. "More than some people who are supposed to be family." The uncomfortable silence that followed was broken by Dr. Patterson's arrival. The neurologist carried a tablet and wore the expression of someone who had difficult information to deliver. "Good evening, everyone. Samuel, how are you feeling?" "Okay, I guess. Tired." Dr. Patterson nodded and turned to the adults. "The test results confirm what we suspected. Samuel has temporal lobe epilepsy. The MRI shows some minor scarring in the left temporal region, which is likely causing the seizure activity." Victoria's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. "Scarring? What kind of scarring? How did that happen?" It's impossible to say definitively without a complete medical history, but this type of scarring can result from high fevers in early childhood, birth trauma, or even genetic predisposition. The important thing is that it's treatable. "What does treatment involve?" Richard's voice came from the doorway. Maria hadn't heard him arrive, but there he stood, still in his business suit despite the late hour, looking like a man who had aged a decade in a single day. "Anti-seizure medication, initially. We'll start with levetiracetam. It's well tolerated in children and very effective for this type of epilepsy. Samuel will need regular blood work to monitor levels and ensure the medication isn't affecting his liver or kidneys." "Side effects?" Victoria asked. "Possibly some fatigue initially as his body adjusts, occasional mood changes. But most children do very well. With proper medication compliance, many patients go years without seizures." Maria watched the family process this information, noting how differently each of them responded. Richard immediately shifted into problem-solving mode, asking about specialists and treatment protocols. Victoria seemed to be calculating the social implications, how to manage Samuel's condition without affecting the family's public image. Samuel himself just looked relieved to have an explanation for what had been happening to him. "Doctor," Maria said carefully, "how long might Samuel have been experiencing smaller seizures before today?" Based on his description of symptoms, the visual disturbances, the spacing out episodes, the headaches, possibly months or even years. These petit mal seizures can be very subtle and are often dismissed as normal childhood behavior. Victoria's face went white. "Years? It's not uncommon for absence seizures to go undiagnosed until they progress to more obvious tonic-clonic seizures like the ones Samuel experienced this morning." "But someone noticed," Samuel said suddenly, his voice quiet but clear. "My abuela Elena. She said I needed to see a doctor about the dizzy spells." The room fell silent. Maria could see Victoria struggling with the memory, probably realizing that the woman she'd fired for overstepping had been right all along. "When can he come home?" Richard asked, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "Tomorrow morning, provided he remains stable overnight." We'll send you home with medication and detailed instructions. I'll also want to see him in my office next week to ensure the medication is working properly." After Dr. Patterson left, the family sat in uncomfortable silence. Maria found herself studying the dynamics between them with new understanding. Samuel's obvious comfort with her, Victoria's defensive postures, Richard's emotional distance. All of it made more sense now that she understood the hidden history connecting their families. "Samuel," Victoria said finally, "when we get home, we need to discuss some changes. No more wandering around Daddy's office building unsupervised, and you'll need to be more careful about your activities." "What kind of changes?" Samuel's voice was small. "Well, we'll need to inform your school about your condition, and perhaps it would be best if you had more structured supervision. I've been thinking about that boarding school in Switzerland we looked at last year." Maria felt her blood run cold. "You want to send him away?" "Now, Maria," Richard warned. "This is a family decision." But Samuel was already shaking his head vigorously. "I don't want to go to boarding school. I want to stay here. I want to stay with people who care about me." "Sweetheart," Victoria said with forced patience, "the school in Switzerland specializes in children with medical conditions. You'd receive the best possible care." "I don't want the best possible care," Samuel said, his voice rising with uncharacteristic defiance. "I want people who love me, like Maria loves me, like my abuela Elena loved me." "That woman is not your grandmother," Victoria snapped, her composure finally completely shattered. "She was an employee who forgot her place, and now she's filling your head with inappropriate ideas about family." "She knew I was sick when nobody else did," Samuel shot back. "She cared about me when nobody else would." Maria couldn't stay silent any longer. Maybe that's because she understood what it meant to love a child unconditionally. Victoria turned on her with fury. "How dare you? You have no right to comment on how we raise our son." "You're right," Maria said, standing. "I have no right as your employee. But as someone who cares about Samuel's well-being, I have every right to speak up when I see a child being pushed aside by parents who are more concerned with appearances than with love." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Richard looked shocked. Victoria appeared ready to explode, and Samuel was staring at Maria with something approaching hero worship. "You're fired," Victoria said coldly. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises." "Victoria," Richard started, but she cut him off. "No, Richard. This woman has overstepped every boundary today. First inserting herself into Samuel's medical care, now presuming to lecture us about parenting." Maria felt a calm settle over her. The same calm she'd felt that morning when she'd found Samuel seizing on the library floor. "That's your choice, Mrs. Blackstone. But I want Samuel to know something." She turned to the boy, who was watching the adult drama with wide, frightened eyes. "Mijo, no matter what happens, you are loved. You are worthy of love. And you deserve people in your life who see that love as a gift, not a burden." As Maria gathered her purse and coat, Samuel called out desperately, "Maria, wait. Don't leave me." The heartbreak in his voice nearly shattered her resolve, but she forced herself to keep walking. At the doorway, she turned back one last time. "Take care of yourself, Samuel. And remember, family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them most." As she walked down the hospital corridor, Maria realized that Victoria had unknowingly given her exactly what she needed: freedom. Freedom from the pretense of being merely an employee, freedom to act on the knowledge she now possessed, and freedom to protect Samuel in ways she never could have while bound by the artificial constraints of her supposed social position. The game had changed, and Maria was ready to play by new rules. 3 weeks passed before Maria saw Samuel again. During that time, she threw herself into caring for her mother, whose sprained wrist had revealed a more serious underlying issue: arthritis that had been worsening for months, but which Elena, with typical stubbornness, had been hiding. Maria used her modest savings to take Elena to a specialist in Denver, grateful for the time away from Aspen Heights and the complicated emotions surrounding her newfound knowledge about the Blackstone family. It was a crisp February morning when she spotted Samuel at Morrison's Market, the small grocery store that served both the wealthy neighborhoods and the working-class areas of Aspen Heights. He was standing in the cereal aisle with a woman Maria didn't recognize, tall, severe-looking, with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. The woman wore the kind of practical clothing that suggested professional caregiving rather than fashion. Samuel looked thinner than he had 3 weeks ago, and there was a quality to his stillness that worried Maria. He stood perfectly straight, hands at his sides, while the woman, clearly some kind of nanny or governess, selected items from the shelves with military precision. "Samuel," Maria called softly, not wanting to startle him. The boy's head whipped around, and his face lit up with a joy so pure it made Maria's chest tight. "Maria, you're here." He started to run toward her, but the stern woman's sharp voice stopped him cold. "Samuel, remember what we discussed about appropriate behavior in public spaces." Samuel's excitement dimmed immediately, but he walked over to Maria with careful, measured steps. When he reached her, she could see the effort it took for him to maintain his composure. "How are you feeling, Mijo?" Maria asked, crouching down to his eye level. "Are the medications helping?" "I think so. I haven't had any more big seizures. But I feel different. Tired all the time. And everything seems—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Like I'm watching it through a window instead of really being there." Maria's heart sank. She recognized the description. It was common for anti-seizure medications to cause cognitive dulling, especially in the early stages of treatment. But it was also something that could often be adjusted with time and careful monitoring. "Samuel," the stern woman called, "we need to finish shopping. Your mother is expecting us back within the hour." "This is Mrs. Hartwell," Samuel explained quietly. "She's my supervisor." The word choice was telling. Not nanny, not caregiver, but supervisor. Maria stood and extended her hand to the woman, who accepted it with the enthusiasm of someone greeting a contagious disease. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Maria Gonzalez. I worked for the Blackstone family." "Yes, I'm aware of who you are," Mrs. Hartwell replied coldly. "Mrs. Blackstone briefed me thoroughly on the staff members who are no longer permitted contact with Samuel." The words stung, but Maria kept her expression neutral. How is Samuel adjusting to his new routine? "Samuel is adapting quite well to proper structure and boundaries. Aren't you, Samuel?" The boy nodded obediently, but Maria caught the flash of misery in his eyes before he could hide it. "Maria," Samuel said suddenly, "did you ask your mom about the star cookies?" Mrs. Hartwell stepped closer, her voice sharp with warning. "Samuel, we've discussed this. You're not to mention inappropriate attachments to former staff members." "But she's not," Samuel started, then stopped himself, glancing nervously between Maria and his supervisor. "She's not what, sweetheart?" Maria asked gently. Samuel looked at Mrs. Hartwell, who was watching him with the intensity of a hawk monitoring prey. "Nothing. I forgot what I was going to say." The defeat in his voice made Maria's hands clench into fists. She could see what was happening. Samuel was being systematically cut off from every source of genuine affection in his life, all in the name of appropriate boundaries and proper structure. "Well," Maria said carefully, "I should let you finish your shopping. But Samuel, if you ever need anything at all, you know where to find me, right?" Samuel nodded, understanding the subtext even if Mrs. Hartwell didn't. As Maria watched them walk away, Samuel's small figure dwarfed by his severe supervisor, she made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. It was time to stop playing by Victoria's rules and start playing by the rules of family, real family, bound by love rather than social contracts. That evening, Maria drove to the Pine Ridge Trailer Park, where she found Elena in her small kitchen, carefully kneading dough with her good hand while her injured wrist rested in a sling. "Mama, what are you making?" "Star cookies," Elena said with a mysterious smile. "I had a feeling someone might need them soon." Maria sat down at the small table, watching her mother work. "I saw Samuel today. They've hired someone to watch him, a woman who treats him like he's dangerous instead of sick." "And how did he look?" "Thin. Sad. Like he's disappearing into himself." Maria paused, then asked the question that had been weighing on her mind for weeks. "Mama, do I have any legal rights? As his cousin, I mean." Elena's hand stilled on the dough. "What kind of rights?" "The right to see him, to know about his medical care, to make sure he's being treated properly. Mija, you have no legal standing as far as the world knows. The Ashworth family made sure of that when they paid to erase your connection to them. But you have proof, don't you? The birth certificates, the medical records?" Elena walked to her bedroom and returned with a small metal box that Maria had seen many times but never been allowed to open. Everything is here. Benjamin's signature on your birth certificate before they changed it. The DNA test the Ashworth family ordered to confirm paternity. The financial agreements, the non-disclosure contracts. Maria opened the box with trembling hands. The papers were yellowed with age, but still legible. Her original birth certificate listed her father as Benjamin Charles Ashworth and her mother as Elena Rosa Gonzalez. Attached was a medical report confirming paternity with a 99.7% certainty. They kept all of this. They kept copies to make sure I never forgot what they could do to me if I spoke out. But they also kept them because, in the end, you are an Ashworth. Blood is blood, Mija, even when it's inconvenient blood. Maria studied the documents, her mind racing with possibilities. If I revealed this publicly, what would happen? The Ashworth Trust Fund would have to be split. Victoria would lose her position as sole heir to her parents' estate. Samuel would no longer be the only grandchild of the Ashworth line. And Victoria? Victoria would lose everything. Her social position, her financial security, her identity as the last pure Ashworth. It would destroy her. Maria thought about Samuel, growing thinner and sadder under the care of people who saw him as a problem to be managed rather than a child to be loved. Then she thought about Victoria, who had built her entire life on a foundation of genetic superiority and social position. What if I didn't reveal it publicly? What if I just let Victoria know that I know? Elena's eyes sharpened with understanding. You want to use it as leverage. I want to use it to protect Samuel. To make sure he gets the love and care he deserves, even if his parents don't know how to give it to him. That's dangerous, Mija. Powerful people don't like being cornered, even by family. Especially by family they've tried to erase. Maria carefully placed the documents back in the box, her decision crystallizing. Then I guess it's time the Ashworth family learned that some things can't be erased. Some people refuse to disappear, no matter how much money you throw at the problem. As she drove home that night, the metal box secure in her passenger seat, Maria realized she was no longer the quiet cleaning lady who had found a seizing child 3 weeks ago. She was Maria Gonzalez Ashworth, and she was about to reclaim not just her birthright, but her cousin's right to be loved unconditionally. The next phase of her plan would require careful timing and considerable courage. But as she thought about Samuel's sad eyes and defeated posture, she knew she had both in abundance. Victoria Blackstone was about to learn that blood, indeed, was thicker than water, and that some family obligations couldn't be bought off or supervised away. The annual Aspen Heights Winter Festival was in full swing by the time Maria decided to make her move. The town square had been transformed into a winter wonderland, complete with ice sculptures, hot chocolate stands, and a massive Christmas tree that sparkled with thousands of lights against the mountain backdrop. Families bundled in designer winter gear strolled between booths selling artisanal crafts and gourmet treats, while classical music drifted from the gazebo where the local orchestra performed nightly concerts. It was the perfect setting for the kind of carefully orchestrated public encounter that would give Maria the privacy she needed while ensuring Victoria couldn't simply walk away from an uncomfortable conversation. Maria positioned herself near the cookie booth run by the Ladies' Auxiliary, knowing that Victoria served on their board and would inevitably stop by to make an appearance. She dressed carefully for the occasion, not in her usual work clothes, but in the navy blue dress she reserved for special occasions, paired with Elena's vintage silver jewelry. She wanted to look like what she was, a woman of dignity and purpose, not someone who could be easily dismissed. Sure enough, at precisely 7 p.m., Victoria appeared in all her winter social glory. She wore a white wool coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the mountain wind, and her smile fixed in the practiced expression of someone accustomed to being photographed at charity events. Maria. Victoria's voice was ice-cold as she spotted her. I thought I made it clear that you're no longer welcome at family events. This isn't a family event, Mrs. Blackstone. It's a community festival, and I'm a member of this community. Maria kept her voice level, even friendly. How is Samuel? I hope he's adjusting well to his new routine. Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Samuel is fine. He's at home with his supervisor, where he belongs. On a night like this, when the whole town is celebrating, Maria gestured toward the festival activities, where children were laughing and playing in the falling snow. It seems sad for a little boy to miss out on something so magical. Samuel has special needs now. Large crowds could trigger another seizure. Maria had done her research in the weeks since Samuel's diagnosis. Actually, epilepsy triggers are usually things like flashing lights, sleep deprivation, or medication noncompliance. Community gatherings are generally considered beneficial for children with epilepsy. They help maintain normal social development. Victoria's smile became even more strained. I wasn't aware you had medical training. I don't. But I care enough about Samuel to educate myself about his condition. Maria paused, letting the implication sink in. Just like my mother cared enough to recognize the symptoms when his own family couldn't. Your mother overstepped her boundaries. She was paid to clean, not to diagnose. She was paid to care for Samuel. And she did that job better than anyone realized at the time. Maria took a breath, preparing to deploy the information that would change everything. In fact, she cared for him exactly the way family should care for family. Something in Maria's tone made Victoria go very still. Around them, the festival continued its cheerful chaos, but between the two women, the air seemed to crystallize with tension. What exactly are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Victoria. I'm stating a fact that your family thought they'd buried 46 years ago. Maria kept her voice conversational, even as she delivered words that would shatter Victoria's world. My mother Elena Gonzalez worked for your family in 1979. She was 19, beautiful, and naive enough to believe that your brother Benjamin's attention was genuine. Victoria's face had gone white beneath her carefully applied makeup. I don't know what you think you. Benjamin Ashworth is my biological father, which makes you my half-aunt, and Samuel my cousin. Maria reached into her purse and pulled out a photocopied birth certificate. Your parents arranged to have my paternity erased from the public record, but they kept the original documentation, along with DNA evidence and financial agreements that proved the whole arrangement. Victoria stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. That's impossible. Benjamin never mentioned. Benjamin was drunk most of the time and dead by the time I was 3. But your parents knew exactly who I was. They've been paying my mother to stay quiet for 46 years. Maria folded the birth certificate carefully and returned it to her purse. The question now is, what are we going to do about it? Victoria looked around wildly, as if seeking an escape route from a conversation that was rewriting her understanding of her own family history. What do you want? Money? Is this some kind of blackmail? I want what any family member would want. I want Samuel to be happy and healthy and loved. Maria stepped closer, her voice dropping to ensure their conversation remained private. Right now, he's none of those things. He's being managed like a problem instead of nurtured like a child. He has the best medical care money can buy. He has medication and supervision. That's not the same thing as care. Maria's voice grew fierce with protective instinct. He's 8 years old, Victoria. He should be out here building snowmen and drinking hot chocolate, not locked away with a governess who treats him like he's made of glass. You don't understand the complexities. I understand that he's family. My family. And I understand that you've been so busy protecting your image that you've forgotten how to love your own son. Victoria's carefully maintained composure finally cracked. How dare you? You think because you share some genetic material with us, you have the right to judge how I raise my child? You're nobody. You're the daughter of domestic help. I'm the daughter of Benjamin Ashworth and the granddaughter of Charles and Margaret Ashworth, just like you are. I have as much Ashworth blood in my veins as you do. Maria's voice remained steady despite the fury building inside her. The only difference is that my mother raised me to understand that blood means responsibility, not privilege. What do you want? Victoria repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to be part of Samuel's life. I want him to know that he has family who loves him unconditionally. I want him to spend time with his great-grandmother Elena, who recognized his illness when his own parents couldn't. Maria paused, watching Victoria process the implications. And I want to make sure that any decisions about his care, including any plans to send him to boarding school, are made with his best interests in mind, not your social convenience. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her gaze fixed on the festival activities where other families were enjoying the kind of simple pleasures she'd never thought to offer her own son. If I agree to this arrangement, what guarantee do I have that you won't reveal your connection to our family? You have my word. As long as Samuel is happy, healthy, and surrounded by people who love him. I have no interest in disrupting your social position. Maria's smile was sharp-edged. But if I ever see him being neglected or mistreated again, if I ever hear about plans to ship him off to Switzerland to protect your image, then our private family arrangement becomes very public very quickly. Victoria closed her eyes, clearly calculating the social and financial implications of having her family's carefully guarded secrets exposed. When she opened them again, her expression had changed from anger to resignation. What exactly are you proposing? I want my old job back. Not because I need the money, but because it gives me legitimate access to Samuel. I want him to be able to visit with Elena regularly. She's his great-grandmother, whether you acknowledge it or not. And I want Mrs. Hartwell replaced with someone who understands that epilepsy is a medical condition, not a character flaw. And in return? In return, the world continues to believe that Victoria Ashworth Blackstone is the sole heir to the Ashworth fortune. Your social position remains intact, your charitable board position secure, your image as Colorado's premier socialite unblemished. Victoria stared at Maria for a long moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. You could have everything. The trust fund, the social position, recognition as an Ashworth heir. Why are you settling for a cleaning job and visiting rights? Maria smiled, thinking of Samuel's thin face and sad eyes, of Elena's weathered hands making star cookies, of the simple love that had sustained her own family through decades of financial struggle. Because, Victoria, I already have everything that matters. I have people who love me for who I am, not what I can give them. I have dignity that doesn't depend on other people's approval. And now I have the power to make sure my cousin gets the same thing. As Maria walked away through the falling snow, leaving Victoria standing alone beside the cookie booth, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. For the first time in her life, she wasn't powerless. She wasn't invisible. She was exactly who she was supposed to be, an Ashworth who understood that true nobility came from lifting others up, not keeping them down. Tomorrow, she would return to the Blackstone household. But this time, she would be walking through those doors not as an employee, but as family. And Samuel would finally have someone in his corner who couldn't be fired, dismissed, or paid to disappear. The game had changed completely, and Maria had won without sacrificing her soul in the process. Spring arrived early in Aspen Heights that year, bringing with it a transformation that seemed to extend far beyond the melting snow and budding aspen trees. By April, the Blackstone household had settled into a new rhythm, one that would have been unimaginable just 3 months earlier. Maria had returned to work the Monday following her confrontation with Victoria, but everything was different now. Mrs. Hartwell had been quietly dismissed, replaced by a kind woman named Sarah Chun who had experience working with children with epilepsy and, more importantly, understood that Samuel needed encouragement rather than rigid supervision. The oppressive atmosphere that had descended over the house during Samuel's early treatment had lifted, replaced by something that felt almost like normalcy. Samuel himself was thriving. The initial medication adjustments had been challenging. Dr. Patterson had needed to fine-tune his prescriptions twice to minimize the cognitive side effects. But by spring, they had found a combination that controlled his seizures without dimming his bright personality. He was back to reading voraciously, asking endless questions about everything from astronomy to archaeology, and even showing interest in learning to cook. It was on a warm Saturday afternoon in late April that the next significant revelation unfolded. Richard had traveled to Hong Kong for a week-long series of business meetings, and Victoria was in Denver attending a charity board retreat, leaving Samuel in the care of Maria and Sarah. They had decided to tackle the enormous task of organizing the estate's library, a project that had been postponed for years, but that Samuel was excited to help with. "Look at this, Maria," Samuel called from behind one of the massive mahogany bookcases. "There's a whole section back here that's completely hidden." Maria made her way through the maze of furniture to find Samuel standing in front of a narrow space between 2 bookshelf units. What had appeared to be a solid wall was actually a cleverly concealed storage area, accessible through a gap barely wide enough for a child to squeeze through. "What did you find, Mijo?" "Boxes and boxes of old papers. And look," he held up a leather-bound photo album. "Pictures of people I don't recognize. But some of them look familiar somehow." Maria's heart began to race as Samuel emerged from the hidden space, carrying several dusty photo albums and a wooden box that looked similar to the one Elena kept at her trailer. With trembling hands, she opened the first album and nearly gasped aloud at what she saw. The photographs were clearly from the 1970s, judging by the clothing and color quality. They showed a younger version of Charles and Margaret Ashworth, Victoria's parents, along with two children Maria recognized as Victoria and Benjamin. But scattered throughout the album were pictures of Elena, looking impossibly young and beautiful, often shown caring for a toddler who was unmistakably Victoria. "Who was that lady?" Samuel asked, pointing to one of the photos where Elena was pushing young Victoria on a swing. "She looks like your mom, but younger." "That is my mom," Maria said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "She worked for your grandparents when your mother was little." Samuel flipped through more pages, his excitement growing. "Look, here she is helping Mom blow out birthday candles. And here she is braiding Mom's hair. And this one." He stopped at a photo that made Maria's breath catch. It showed Elena holding a baby while a very young Victoria looked on with obvious adoration. "Who's the baby?" Maria studied the photo more carefully. The baby appeared to be about 6 months old, with Elena's dark hair but strikingly light eyes. In the background, barely visible, was a young man who could only be Benjamin Ashworth. "I think," Maria said slowly, "that baby is me." The implications hit both of them simultaneously. Samuel's eyes widened as he processed what this meant, while Maria felt pieces of her family's puzzle clicking into place in ways she had never expected. "So Mom knew you when you were little? She knew your mom was taking care of you." Before Maria could answer, they heard the sound of a car in the driveway, Victoria returning earlier than expected from her retreat. Quickly, Maria gathered the photo albums and the wooden box. "Samuel, let's put these back for now. This is something your mother and I need to discuss privately." But Samuel shook his head firmly. "No, Maria. I want to know the truth. All of it. I'm tired of adults keeping secrets and making decisions about my life without telling me what's really going on." The determination in his voice reminded Maria forcefully of herself at his age, and probably of Victoria too, though in very different circumstances. This was an Ashworth trait, apparently, the refusal to be placated with half-truths. Victoria's heels clicked across the marble foyer as she called out, "Samuel? Where are you?" "In the library," he called back, clutching one of the photo albums to his chest. Victoria appeared in the doorway, looking elegant despite her long drive, but her expression quickly shifted to alarm when she saw what Samuel was holding. "Where did you find that?" Her voice was sharp with panic. "In the secret space behind the bookshelf," Samuel said matter-of-factly. "Did you know Maria's mom used to take care of you when you were little? There are pictures of them together all the time." Victoria's gaze moved between Samuel and Maria, her face cycling through several emotions before settling on resignation. "Samuel, those are very old photographs. They don't. They show Elena raising you," Maria said quietly. "Just like she raised me. Just like she would have raised Benjamin's children if your parents had let her." Victoria closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, Maria saw something she had never seen before: vulnerability. "You were there," Victoria said slowly. "In my earliest memories, Elena was always there. I remember her singing to me in Spanish, making special treats when I was sick, reading to me at bedtime." Her voice grew softer. "After Benjamin died, and after they sent Elena away, I asked about her for months. My parents told me she had moved away, that it was inappropriate for me to miss the help." "But you did miss her," Samuel said with the insight that children sometimes possess. "I did, more than I was allowed to admit." Victoria sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs, looking older than Maria had ever seen her. "When I hired Elena years later, when Samuel was small, I thought I could recapture some of that feeling. But it was complicated. I knew she was taking care of someone else's child too, and I was jealous. Jealous of a child I didn't even know existed." "You were jealous of me," Maria said with sudden understanding. "I was jealous of anyone who had Elena's love without having to hide it, without having to pretend it didn't matter." Victoria looked at Samuel, then back at Maria. "I fired her because watching her with Samuel reminded me of everything I'd lost when my parents decided that loving the help was inappropriate for an Ashworth." The three of them sat in silence, the weight of generations of secrets and misunderstandings settling between them. Outside, the late afternoon sun was painting the mountains in shades of gold and pink, and Maria realized that this moment, this honest reckoning with the past, was what Samuel had been missing his entire life. "I want to see her," Victoria said suddenly. "Elena, I want to apologize." "She'd like that," Maria said softly. "She's missed you too. All these years, she's missed her little Victoria." Samuel looked between the two women, his mother and his cousin, with growing excitement. "So we really are all family?" "All of us. All of us," Maria confirmed. "Your great-grandmother Elena, your mom, your dad, you, and me. And Carlos, he's your cousin too. This is going to be the best family," Samuel declared with the certainty that only 8-year-olds possess. "Can we have Elena's star cookies at Sunday dinner tomorrow?" Victoria laughed, actually laughed, for the first time Maria could remember. "I think that can be arranged." As they put the photo albums away carefully, planning to go through them properly together later, Maria realized that the hidden space behind the bookshelf had revealed more than just old photographs. It had revealed the truth that everyone had been trying to hide, even from themselves. That love, real love, couldn't be contained by social boundaries or family secrets. The Ashworth legacy wasn't really about money or social position. It was about the people who had cared enough to stay, to fight for each other, and to keep loving even when that love had been deemed inappropriate by those who should have known better. And now, finally, that legacy could continue in the open, without shame or secrecy, binding them all together in the way families were meant to be bound, by choice as much as by blood. December arrived in Aspen Heights with a spectacular snowfall that transformed the town into the kind of winter wonderland that graced Christmas cards and tourism brochures. But for Maria, watching the snow fall from the windows of the Blackstone Estate Library, where she now spent her afternoons helping Samuel with his homework, the real magic wasn't in the scenery. It was in the transformation that had taken place within these walls over the past 8 months. The house that had once felt like a mausoleum of unfulfilled obligations had become something approaching a home. Samuel's laughter echoed through corridors that had previously known only the sound of expensive heels on marble floors. Family photographs now included candid moments rather than just formal portraits, and the kitchen actually smelled like cooking. Real cooking, not just the catered meals that had once constituted family dinners. Elena had become a weekly fixture at Sunday dinners, arriving each week with a new batch of star cookies and stories that captivated Samuel for hours. Victoria had initially struggled with the adjustment, watching her son bond with the woman she had once loved and lost, but gradually she had begun to participate in the storytelling, sharing her own childhood memories of Elena's care. "Maria," Samuel called from where he sat at the massive oak table, his homework spread around him like a battlefield. "Can you help me with this math problem? And when we're done, can we call Cousin Carlos?" The easy way Samuel had incorporated his expanded family into his daily routine never failed to warm Maria's heart. Carlos, now aware of his true connection to the Blackstones, had initially been skeptical of the wealthy relatives who had suddenly appeared in his life. But Samuel's genuine enthusiasm and Elena's patient explanations had gradually won him over, and the two boys had developed an unlikely but strong friendship despite their 8-year age gap. "Of course, Mijo. What's the problem?" As Maria leaned over Samuel's shoulder to examine his arithmetic, she noticed Richard standing in the library doorway, watching them with an expression she was still learning to read. The businessman who had once seemed larger than life had revealed himself to be surprisingly human over the past months, capable of genuine emotion and, more surprisingly, genuine change. "Samuel," Richard said, entering the room, "your mother and I wanted to discuss something with you." "With both of you," he added, glancing at Maria. Victoria appeared beside her husband, and Maria was struck again by how much softer she looked these days. The constant tension that had once marked her features had eased, replaced by something that looked almost like contentment. She was still impeccably dressed, still moved through the world with the confidence of someone accustomed to deference, but there was a warmth there now that hadn't existed before. "What kind of discussion?" Samuel asked, immediately alert. Months of medical crises and family revelations had made him sensitive to adult conversations that began with careful preambles. "A good discussion," Victoria assured him quickly. "We've been thinking about the future, about our family, and about some changes we'd like to make." Richard pulled up a chair beside Samuel, while Victoria settled into her usual spot near the fireplace. The casual way they arranged themselves spoke to how much their family dynamics had shifted, no longer formal and distant, but actually comfortable with each other's presence. Samuel, Richard began, your mother and I have decided to establish a charitable foundation focused on pediatric epilepsy research and support for families dealing with childhood seizure disorders. Samuel's eyes lit up. Really? That's awesome. Will it help other kids like me? That's exactly the idea, Victoria said. We want to make sure that no family has to struggle the way we did to get proper diagnosis and treatment. And we want to ensure that children with epilepsy have access to not just medical care, but emotional support. But here's the thing, Richard continued. We want this to be a family foundation, which means we want both Maria and Elena to be involved, not as employees, but as board members with real decision-making power. Maria felt her breath catch. Richard, that's very generous, but I don't have any experience with. You have the most important experience, Victoria interrupted. You know what it means to love a child with special needs unconditionally. You know how to fight for what's right even when it's uncomfortable. And you know how to see past social boundaries to focus on what really matters. Besides, Samuel added with the logic that adults often missed, your family. Family helps family. Richard nodded. Which brings us to the other change we wanted to discuss. Maria, we'd like to offer you a different position. Not as household staff, but as the Foundation's Director of Family Services. It would mean your own office, a significant salary increase, and the authority to develop programs that actually help families. Maria looked around the room at these people who had become so central to her life, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they were offering. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Elena's voice came from the doorway, where she stood with Sarah Chun, both women carrying trays laden with hot chocolate and fresh star cookies. Say yes because it's what you were meant to do, Mija. Say yes because Samuel needs you, and other children need you too. As Elena and Sarah distributed the hot chocolate, a ritual that had developed over the months, Maria realized that this moment represented everything she had fought for without really knowing she was fighting for it. Not recognition of her birthright or access to the Ashworth fortune, but the chance to use her position to make a real difference in the lives of children who needed advocates. There's one more thing, Victoria said quietly. We've decided to renovate the estate's guest house. We'd like Elena to move in, if she's willing. She shouldn't be living alone at her age, and Samuel, we all, would benefit from having her closer. Elena's weathered hands trembled slightly as she set down her tray. You want me to live here? On the estate. We want you to live with family, Victoria said simply. The way it should have been all along. The emotion in the room was palpable as Elena covered her face with her hands, overcome by an offer she had never dared hope for. Samuel immediately went to her side, taking her hands in his small ones. Please say yes, Abuela Elena. Please stay with us. Si, mi principe, Elena whispered. Si, I will stay. As the afternoon dissolved into evening, with snow continuing to fall outside and the fire crackling warmly in the hearth, Maria looked around at her family. Blood and chosen, traditional and unconventional, but undeniably real. Samuel was teaching Carlos a card game over video chat, while Elena supervised with gentle corrections. Victoria and Sarah were planning the menu for Christmas dinner, actually excited about cooking together. Richard was reviewing foundation documents with the concentrated attention he usually reserved for business deals. Maria, Samuel said suddenly, looking up from his cards, are you happy? The question was simple, but the answer was complex. 8 months ago, she had been a cleaning lady who found a seizing child and made a split-second decision to help. That decision had led to revelations that changed everything she thought she knew about herself, confrontations that could have destroyed her livelihood, and choices that required more courage than she had known she possessed. But looking around this room, watching Elena teach Victoria how to properly roll cookie dough while Samuel provided enthusiastic but unhelpful commentary, seeing Richard actually smile as he read about treatment protocols for childhood epilepsy, Maria realized that happiness wasn't the right word for what she felt. I'm home, she said simply. For the first time in my life, I'm home. Samuel grinned. Good. Because we need you here. All of us. Outside. The snow continued to fall on Aspen Heights, blanketing the town in pristine white that would soon be disturbed by the tracks of families heading to Christmas celebrations and New Year's gatherings. But inside the Blackstone estate, in the warm glow of firelight and surrounded by the sound of genuine laughter, Maria understood that she had found something more valuable than any inheritance or social position. She had found her place in the world. And more importantly, she had helped Samuel find his, not as the lonely heir to a cold fortune, but as the beloved center of a family that had learned to value love over appearances, truth over convenience, and the kind of wealth that couldn't be deposited in a bank account. The Ashworth legacy would continue, but it would be defined not by social registers or trust funds, but by the simple revolutionary act of choosing to love unconditionally and fight for what was right, even when it was difficult. Especially when it was difficult. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell notification, and if you watched until here, comment, "I watched until here," and leave your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen for you. It's very exciting.